and welcome to our Fair Chance Conversation series. I'm Matt Joyce.
And I'm Cassie Zumbiel, joining for the first time as a host rather than a guest in these conversations. And I'm very glad to start with such an exciting interview.
Me too. Thanks, Cassie. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by Jason Whyte, as the co-founder and chair of the National Workforce Reentry Coalition. Jason, thank you for joining us.
Matt, thank you so much for having me. And Cassie, good to see you again.
So, Jason, the coalition you're leading is now in its fourth year of operations, just hosted its first major convening, and just excited to start by hearing a little bit of the founding vision for the NWRC and some of the goals that you're working towards accomplishing.
Yeah, Matt, it's interesting because 4 years ago when we got together, it was literally just a group of practitioners. And we really felt like we needed to connect because we recognized that the way that we were functioning in silos was very costly and inefficient, right? And what was very clear is there was in some regards, a consensus or a collective belief that if we could find ways to work together, we could actually have a larger impact. And that is kind of what has led us down this journey over the past 4 years. So it's been a very rich experience. And what's interesting is that the closer we go, or the more we travel down this journey, so to say, the more it became clear to us that there needs to be a dedicated effort focused on really building the field of reentry workforce, because there's quite a bit of work to be done.
That's great. And we know employers are so important in this work. Can you describe how you help make the business case to employers on fair chance hiring?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cassie, as we were developing in RWC, we identify a few areas of focus, one of which is focusing on employer engagement, right? And NRWC's commitment is really to work towards working with organizations and employers to develop and build strong relationships that are mutually beneficial, right? That being said, there are a few things that oftentimes when I personally engage with employers and even other stakeholders as well, and I talk about the business case that I often share, right? One of which is there is a great need for talent, bottom line, right? As recent as last summer, there were for every one job seeker, there were about 3 job vacancies, right? So when you talk about a need, that is often a place to start. There's a real need for talent in the marketplace. The second thing I often talk about with employers as it relates to the business case is that the research actually shows that individuals who are impacted by the justice system, oftentimes, now key thing, when you have the right fit, right? Because with any employer or employee, I should say, the key is, are they the right fit for the role? So when a person is the right fit, a person who is impacted by the justice system is the right fit for a particular role, oftentimes those persons show greater loyalty, and in some cases, sometimes even work harder than the person that does not have the background. And I think a reasonable assumption as to why that is the case is there are so many barriers to finding jobs when a person has a criminal record. So for them to find a role that really fits with their aptitude and their skill set, they really are often committed to do whatever they can to get the job done and to work as best as they can with the employer. The last thing that I often share is just the responsibility that an employer has, like any other citizen or institution, to play a part in addressing some of the social ills in society, right? I would argue that mass incarceration is maybe the number one civil rights issue that we're dealing with in this day and age. So this is really an opportunity for employers to also play a part in addressing mass incarceration as well. And the nice thing about it is a win-win situation, right? Because they're able to meet their talent needs, but also support someone that is seeking an opportunity to earn a living to support themselves and their family.
Definitely. And I know you mentioned some data. Are there resources or education that you find leaders need in order to make them champions of fair chance hiring?
There are some resources that are available, and I think I would say a growing number of resources. And I'm encouraged as I consider myself a practitioner too, so I'm encouraged that is the case. One of the I'll just highlight a few resources, is Jeffrey Korzenik's book on top talent. I think he did a phenomenal job. It was very clear that he invested a lot of time in doing the research. Matter of fact, when I learned about the book and I started reading it, I could not put it down because I'm like, this is a resource that's needed in the field. So I would definitely recommend that resource, right? Another thing that I often recommend is finding support organizations, right? Oftentimes, community-based organizations are good partners, or can be good partners as well. I know Envoy, your company does a ton of work in this area as well, in reviewing policies, and which is often one of the stumbling blocks or that needs to be adjusted if an employer is going to do a good job in fair chance hiring. So I'll just highlight those three resources for now. There are other resources that are out there as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Jeff Korzenik's book, because I think we're in a moment where an economist who takes the long view on this work, who's looking 30, 40, 50 years out at the labor market, it's very helpful to have that with the sort of fluctuating talent needs that we have right now. So a year ago, when everybody was crunched for talent, you know, there was sort of, I think, a rush towards this work. I think with fears of recession, some folks are saying, like, do we still need to be as invested? And you read Jeff's book and realize this is not a sort of year over year issue. This is a long-term issue and something that employers need to be preparing for. So on the theme of resources, want to talk a little bit about the toolkit that the coalition just put out. I think one of the things we've found in our work is just how valuable the perspective of community organizations who are working directly with employers is to sort of being able to elevate best practices and help them kind of figure out what's the sort of the best relationship between a workforce organization and an employer to both refer, but then also support employees. And so I wanted to hear a little bit about sort of the audience that you are putting the toolkit out towards and who it's written for, and just some of the practices that you highlight.
Absolutely. You know, in my experience, what I've found is oftentimes relationships between the community-based organization, or sometimes I say support organization, because you do have a variety of organizations that engage with employers and support them, and employers. I often come to realize that the relationship is underutilized, right? There is so much more value that both entities can add to each other, and the employer engagement toolkit is actually designed to help to harvest a little bit more of that value for all the parties that are engaged, right? So what we try to do in the toolkit is actually outline, in some regards, like a 5-step process, even though it does not have to be sequential, so to say, that starts all the way from an organization doing the research and finding the appropriate employer to partner with, all the way through engaging with the employer, placing a job seeker with the employer, and a special emphasis too on ensuring that the first hire is a win for both entities, right? And then it goes on to how do you cultivate that relationship? And after cultivating a relationship, how do you work with your existing employers to even build a network of employers that you work with locally as well? Even to the point where the employers now get a chance to be able to influence or contribute to even the development of the training that the community-based organization provides to the individuals as they're preparing them to potentially be considered for job opportunities at the company.
That's great.
I
I know that you also recently hosted a conference
yes.
and that I heard was amazing and brought together leaders in the reentry and workforce fields. What were some of the big learnings or takeaways that came out of the convening?
Absolutely. Yes. So you're right. Every time I talk about the conference, I honestly, I can go for a week, but I'm just going to keep it very, very short. I was so encouraged to, to see the value that the conference added to the field. And I say that because we, as I said 4 years ago, we said, you know, we need to get together and we need to find ways to break down these silos. And, you know, oftentimes in our field, you have groups that convene, but oftentimes they convene in their own echo chambers, so to say. So maybe community-based organization would convene separately, state agencies separately, employers separately. This particular conference, what we try to do, at least we try our best to do, is to try to bring all stakeholders in the field together. And what was interesting from that experience was it was just amazing how many persons talked about how much they learned from the different perspectives that were shared on different topics. So it's almost like each topic that was, or each presenter had a fresh perspective because they were coming from such a different angle and perspective. So so I would say that was one of the key things that that I saw that was very valuable. Another thing, especially considering that we just came out of a pandemic, right? And we're kind of brushing off our bruises and injuries from that process, is just the need for people to get a chance to connect in person, right? Persons were so grateful to be able to connect and build relationship and establish even some at least initiate some partnership opportunities. So it really was a ripe space for engaging in partnerships, because as I said, we did have stakeholders from all aspects of the ecosystem that were there. And we're really looking forward to next year. So it was a great experience.
It's great. And coming off of the convening, I'm curious for employers who are excited to partner with the collaborative and with the members of the collaborative. One, just, you know, what does that look like for you? How do employers engage? And then just curious, as you look 2, 3, 4 years out at kind of the field and the ecosystem, just where the collaborative kind of wants to grow and the influence that you're hoping to have moving forward.
Absolutely. You know what? Oftentimes, fair chance hiring is often referred to as a movement, right? It's a movement. It's not just simply programming, right? But we are really meeting a need in the market in terms of talent shortage, but at the same time, we are committing ourselves to addressing a significant social ill that we're all experiencing. So as a result, we often refer to it as a movement. I think where NIWC comes in, I'll just highlight one key thing, is it really is a platform for leading companies in this space that have stepped forward and say, you know what, we're going to give this a shot. And by the way, each company is at very different stage of the process, right? I don't know, you know this from working with so many different companies, but I think creating that platform for those trailblazers, so to say, to be able to have a space to share what they're doing, but also to hear what others are doing, it seemed to be very, very meaningful for employers. And I've gotten quite a bit of feedback about how, even recently I was talking with an associate from WM Waste Management, and he's the person that leads the Fair Chance hiring effort there, and he was sharing how hearing a different perspective about the convening gave him so much insight, even about some things that he needed to go back immediately and change, like right now, to strengthen this objective that he has to really make the context within his workplace a more inclusive environment. So it was encouraging to know that the convening actually created an opportunity for employers to be able to take away things that they can employ that are practical and could have real impact on their bottom line.
So this has been such a great conversation. To round us out, what advice would you give employers in building proactive, best-in-class, fair chance initiatives at their organization?
I would just highlight a few things, one of which is from talking with many employers and working with a number of employers across the country, I think there's a general consensus that I'm sure there are exceptions, right? That there's a need for some form of partnership with a community-based organization or some form of support organizations, right? And by the way, to be clear, we're talking about a company that is thinking about fair chance hiring from a longer-term perspective, right? So the advantage with working with such group is that it creates an opportunity to build a talent pipeline and even be able to do some vetting to significantly reduce the cost for recruitment and hiring and even retention, right? Because the role of the community partner is not just recruitment. In some regards, to some degree, it's almost like an extension of their HR arm, right? Where there could be some support around recruitment, some support around retention, and even some support around providing even feedback around how things may need to change within the culture of the company for them to be more effective. Another thing that I would encourage is to review their hiring practices and policies, right? And I know Envoy, that's one of the roles that you play in the field. So engaging with companies like yourself or other providers who can help them to think about it, not just from a legal standpoint, which is important, but also from a social standpoint as well, right? Even as we know that, especially in this day and age, consumers are holding companies accountable for the social contribution that they're making to their community. So as you review those hiring practices, it really, with the right support, right, it really is an opportunity for you to gain exponential value in how to kind of reposition your culture or your policy or your procedure to ensure that you're finding the right talent, but also gaining additional benefits from that process.
Jason, I would just echo, and I'll give you the closing statement, but just echo how important it is that companies have that relationship with organizations that are doing effective vetting, supporting, referring, kind of helping make those connections, and also just so encouraged that the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative is bringing together those organizations, because having worked in one that was always trying to learn and always trying to share best practices, it's nice to have a home where high quality organizations can learn from each other and kind of figure out how to grow and how to support. So excited for that work, but please close us out with your final thought.
You know, that's a perfect segue to what you just said, because the last thing I was going to say is employers should come to our convening for the very purpose of what you just said, Matt, because again, we actually had about 20 employers that came to our last convening, and it was super encouraging to know that so many actually showed up. But what was even more encouraging is the employers were talking in specific ways how they were able to take certain perspective and incorporate those into the way that they're functioning. So along with the work that they're doing to reposition how they do things internally, to have a space where it's like a melting pot of ideas within the field, right? And that's what we're really trying to create. So yeah, I would definitely encourage employers to come out next year to our convening.
We'll close there. Jason, I hope employers who are listening will reach out to you, will engage with you, reach out to your member organizations, because there are some incredible organizations that make up the collaborative that will be great partners. But just really appreciate your insights and your time, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt and Cassie. I'm grateful for the opportunity.